My name is Paul Zeig. I'm an attorney in town. Been here since, maybe 5. Practice in real estate, a lot of small business, startups, representation, really startup all the way to sale. And I also do estate planning work and probate work and trust work. Have worked with Sherry and the Port Authority, my goodness, for a long time. To tell you how long we display our ages, and that's not good for either of us. So we've been through this bit before. My goal tonight is to go over kind of business organizations, what the possibilities are for whatever business entity you're looking at doing. It really doesn't matter the field or the type of business you're in. Explain what they are, and then Pat and I are going to bounce back and forth about what are the advantages, either from a tax perspective, maybe from an organization or a voting perspective, or partner or employee perspective. So it's going to be interactive. If you have questions in the course of what we're doing here tonight, just holler them out and let's get them answered, and we'll kind of move along. Going off of the sheet, which is truly just kind of it's an outline, clearly, is what it is, and I drafted it for myself. The very first, easiest business organization is a sole proprietorship. I'm in business for myself. I'm not incorporated, I'm not an LLC, I'm just Joe Blow selling mini donuts on the corner. After a while, I want to do business with Sherry, so we decide to do business. I'm selling the mini donuts, she sells the milk or whatever on the side that you're going to drink after the mini donuts. Now we're a partnership because we've agreed to go into business together. We don't have to have a written agreement, although most of the time we do. Anytime we do a joint venture together, we're partners. The legal import of being a partner is I make a bad decision in the business, she's liable for it because we're partners. It's called a general partnership, and again, you don't have to have a written agreement. You should. Any oral agreement works, and I get to bind the business, the decisions that I make, Sherry does, and even though I don't like what she does, I'm stuck with that, and I have to stand behind that decision to anybody else that we're in contract with for the decisions that were made. So for years and years and years and years and years, those were really the only 2 businesses that worked. Eventually, somebody decided Sherry doesn't want to have to put up with my bad decisions anymore and be personally liable for those decisions. So how can we find a way to limit the liability of 1 or 2 of the partners in the business so that she's not responsible for me or her personal assets aren't placed in jeopardy because of the decisions that I make in the course of the business? That's the origin of a corporation. A corporation is a limited liability entity, meaning that if I have a beef with a corporation or a claim against a corporation, whether it's contractual or their products have injured me somehow, you name it, I am able to sue the corporation or make claims against the corporation, but it's a separate entity, and it's different from Sherry individually and Paul individually. It's Sherry and Paul Inc. So the only assets that you can get at from a corporate standpoint are the assets of the corporation, the money we put into it, the equipment that we purchase, the equipment that we have, any intellectual property or assets we've developed. Sherry's immense wealth is not exposed for liabilities of the corporation, nor is mine. Okay, so now we can go in business for ourselves, just a mom and pop shop. We could be partners, which means in both of those instances, our personal assets are exposed and we're liable for any obligations of the business out of our personal assets, and we have a corporation. Okay? Corporations have been around for a long, long time, and I don't know, when did S Corps come into being?
Well, over 35 years.
Yeah, 60s, 70s. For the longest time, corporations were established under subchapter C of the Internal Revenue Code, known as C corporations, and there are various rules and regulations regarding C corporations. One of which I'm sure Pat will talk about is taxation. If you get taxed at the corporate level, and then when you make your distributions, you get taxed at the individual level as it comes out. So you get double tax for any profits you make in a C corporation. Smart people way back when, 40 years ago, decided I don't want to get double taxed anymore. So they developed what's called an S corporation, or a small business corporation. In an S corporation, you can make various elections that Pat's going to talk more about, but you don't get taxed on income at the corporate level. It passes through to you on your own income tax return, and you get taxed at your ordinary income rate, subject to certain exceptions, and if you make all the filings, etc. So for most purposes, the S corporation is a much better vehicle for a small business owner for a variety of reasons. We'll talk about LLCs in just a second. But when you compare a C corporation to an S corporation, an S corporation is much more flexible for a lot of different things. Number one is distributions. Number two is the types of shareholders that can own it. And again, taxation is the biggest thing. But the similarity, which is most important as small business owners that you're looking at, is you can't get through that corporation to the personal assets of yourselves when you start your business. It is only subject to the assets that are in that corporation. Now that includes the $100 you took to start the corporation, any equipment you buy. If you develop the next greatest widget that's worth $1 billion and it's owned by the corporation, the value of that, of course, is subject to attack by somebody who's a claim against the corporation, but they don't get to go after your personal belongings or your yacht or your place in the Bahamas or any of those types of things. So that limited liability structure is what we're looking for. Okay, after a bit, this is in the 90s, I think, late 80s, early 90s, people decided that the S corporation was still too rigid of a structure and we wanted to develop something else. So we came along with a limited liability company. It is, as the name suggests, the same as a C Corp and an S Corp in the extent, or to the extent that the entity itself is a separate thing and liability for debts or obligations or wrongs by this company can only be assessed against the assets of the company. The difference is there's greater flexibility from taxation. You can, in terms of structure of the company, you can make some distinctions that you can't do with an S corporation that might be beneficial for folks in terms of ownership, in terms of creditors coming back and attaching your ownership interest in the LLC. But again, similarity-wise, the biggest asset of an LLC is the same as a C Corp and an S Corp. It's limited liability. Now on this sheet, if you go down to number 4, and number 4, there's a for-profit and a non-profit, both in corporations and in limited liability companies. We can talk about nonprofits if you want. I suspect most people are interested in making a profit in their company, and that's the reason that you're here. Structure is essentially the same, a whole different set of rules in terms of reporting for a nonprofit, and it's established under different statutes, different rules in the statutes. But again, most of us are looking for a for-profit entity that's going to protect our assets. So, in the of course, in number 5, there's cooperatives, and there's other business entities that can be used for a startup business, limited liability partnerships. Sometimes we have professional liability partnerships, family limited partnerships. A number of those things, which are all variations on the same thing. The thing that as a startup business owner you want to look for is liability protection. I want to make sure that my personal assets are not exposed to attack because of something that either I couldn't pay my debts for my new business, or my great widget exploded and injured somebody, and now I've got a $100,000, $200,000, $1 million judgment against my corporation or my company. I want to make sure that my assets personally aren't exposed to that attack, either by creditors or by somebody who has a judgment against me. Okay, that's an overview, really quick overview of the entities that are available or the things that can be done. Because you choose one or the other doesn't mean that you're stuck with that forever. You come in and you meet with myself or somebody else and you establish a corporation or an S corporation or a limited liability company, and you're off and running. Maybe you take on a partner and they become a limited liability member, they become a shareholder of the S corporation, and you're chugging along for 4 or 5 years and think, you know what, tax-wise that's not working out so well. Or I want to make differing distributions. I want to take 60% of the revenue. I want to give Sherry 40% of the revenue because she's no longer really active in the business. She's off doing her own thing, even though she's still in ownership of part of this business. Well, if that desire, let's take distribution, differing distributions. to differ the amount of distributions or differ the weight in your voting strength, your voting authority is something that you want to change and it doesn't fit in your entity, you can change from an LLC to an S Corp or from an S Corp to an LLC. Most of the time, the primary difference is in the tax code. You have to make certain elections and let the IRS and the Minnesota Department of Revenue know, now we're this thing, we're going to be this thing, and we're going to be taxed differently. There are also a couple of filings you have to do with the Minnesota Secretary of State when you establish the change from S Corp to LLC or vice versa, but those are relatively minor. The takeaway that I want you to have tonight from that is you're not locked into one entity once you start there. You can make changes to them. Now, and Pat, jump in on this. When we change from an S Corp or S Corp to a C Corp, C Corp to S Corp to an LLC, there may be income recognition issues.
Right, right. So, I mean, a lot of our clients work with, like Paul said, we start as a sole proprietor because we're going to get into business for ourselves. So one of the things that happens a lot the last few years is people walk in and they say, they'll come in to do their taxes and they say, oh, hey, I'm an LLC now. And I said, well, okay, how'd you do that? Well, I went online and filed the stuff, and I said, well, how many people are in the LLC? So one of the things, if we're by ourselves, a single member LLC is very easy to start. It's very inexpensive, and we aren't really getting into business with anyone. So a lot of times I'll try to tell my clients, it's so easy to get in business together. Let's say the two of you are going to get into business together. Everybody's always excited, and we can get into business inexpensively, reasonably, and everybody likes one another. Unfortunately, Paul and I see from great regularity that we all don't continue to like each other for a long time, over time, because now we have different financial goals, or we have different work habits. So what we try to work with clients is to, if we're starting a new business, how many of you have been in business or starting a new one? Starting a new one, been in business. So what I tell people all the time is, I'll have people come in and, LegalZoom advertises all over the place. And I have people come in and they walk in with like 200 pages of stuff. I said, okay, and they paid LegalZoom like $590, and they don't even know what they have. It doesn't really cost that much, not that Paul works for free, but when you can talk to someone and walk through some of the pros and cons, which is what I printed out for you here, you can see that if I'm in business for myself, and Paul approaches things a lot from a liability protection, which I do as well, if you make something or you sell something and it breaks and someone thinks that you've not done them well, they are going to ask their attorney to try to talk to you, and what you do with the sole proprietor is that's right on your personal tax return. So if I'm married, my wife's income is going to be on the tax return because that single member LLC or sole proprietorship is on my personal tax return. So that kind of goes into the whole order of discovery, which is all this, the legal guys, which is why you want to have, unfortunately.
He was going to say BS, but he stopped himself.
No, but unfortunately, if we're in business, we all probably should have an attorney that we know, and especially if we've done anything other than a sole proprietorship, it's a good idea to have someone, because I'm here to tell you, I've been doing income taxes for 36 years, and the older I get, the more classes I go to, the more seminars I go to, because it's just, as our economy and unfortunately our judicial system keeps getting busier and busier, you have to find ways to make sure that you're as knowledgeable as you can be about, oh, I didn't know that. And where I go on that is I go on it from a sales tax standpoint. If we sell things, the IRS and all the states are all looking for more contributions from all of our business clients. So we want to make sure that we know all of the things that we should know, or potential taxes, whether storage. Somebody was talking about putting their boat into storage the other day. So then I kind of went with that and I said, do you put it in the building? Yep. And he said, but I have my motorhome and the building's not big enough for my motorhome, so I park it at this place's outdoor parking lot. Inside the building is not subject to sales tax. Outside the building, on the same property, is subject to sales tax.
Really?
No. So there's just so much stuff that if we're going to be in business, there's just a lot of stuff to keep track of. So what we try to do is try to get to know our clients. And one of the easiest things is, like I said, if you look at this front and back, you'll see the entity's pros and cons, and it really just supports what Paul's talking about is when he says a partnership. What does that really mean? Well, when you're in a partnership, an old-fashioned partnership that we still have maybe a handful of clients that are still in partnerships, and they're all pretty much family-owned because family kind of can still get along with family, kind of. But every dime that you make in a certain type of partnership is going to be subject to Social Security tax. So what happens with partnerships then is you, like Paul said, oh, I'm in partnership with my brother and he went out to Las Vegas and he gambled the business checkbook away and he actually owes, and that was one of the horror stories that you'll hear about is if I'm in a general partnership, I generally don't want to be in a general partnership with anybody, and like I said, I have like maybe this many partnerships left. I'm in an LLC, which also can file as a partnership, but now if Paul goes out to Las Vegas and loses it and takes the company checkbook, oh, and by the way, he thought he was doing well and he owes even more money, that's on Paul. You know, they can't come take all of my stuff.
I'm going to win it all back on my next trip. The third trip is the challenge.
You know,
Yeah.
and all of, I don't know how, I'm sure you guys have friends maybe, I have clients, and all of my clients, when you talk to them at the beginning, break even.
Mm-hmm. Gambling.
Yeah, we always break even. Oh, I was able to pay for my trip. And then they bring in their stuff later in the year and they give you a printout and they go, no, I don't think we broke even.
Didn't break even.
I wonder how it is they keep building all that stuff out of Treasure Island or wherever. But as a partnership, that's the type of stuff Paul was talking about, is that if you two like each other and you want to get into business, it's not a real good thing in my estimation. And I'm not an attorney, but I know that we all probably work hard for our money, and if he screws up, I really don't want to have to worry about my house and my stuff.
Right.
So
let's jump off that for a second. So everybody's here because we want to get into we want to start a business or continue something that we started. First, well, it's not the first thing. The first thing is the financial planning and doing the business plan, which is the next meeting and all the rest of it. But when you're to the point when you have an idea, you have a plan, and you have a little bit of money scratched together and you think you can start this, you need to figure out, this is on my sheet now, what do you want to be? You come to me or someone else and you say, I want to be a sole proprietor, or I want to be an S-Corp, or I want to be an LLC, and you have a conversation, understand what you're doing. To Pat's point, LegalZoom, you can get all that stuff, and some of their documents are good. There's in most cases, or in many cases, not a whole lot wrong with them, except that unless you understand what all of these words mean and the order of what they mean, it might get you organized as an LLC or a corporation, but you don't know what kind of a pickle you've gotten yourself into because you don't know how it applies to the tax code and the rest of it. So from a startup standpoint, you have to have your plan, you have to have your finances in order, and then you have to decide, what am I going to be? Am I a service industry? Am I a manufacturer? Am I an idea? Am I developing IT, inventions, patents, intellectual property, those types of things? Because all of those things dictate what kind of a entity, what kind of a thing that you should be. Once we figure that out, and I think I'm brilliant, and I say, great, this is what we're gonna be, then we call Pat and say, Pat, I have Sherry here, this is what she's gonna do, this is what we think she should be. And then Pat says, have you lost your mind? It makes no sense in that particular situation because of whatever tax code implications there are.
And like anything, there's pros and cons. So whenever I meet with new clients, I literally will give them these sheets I've given you because it gets you to think about things. Because if I meet 5 new clients, 4 of them will tell me I want to be an LLC. And then they'll go, I'll say, well, what kind of an LLC? And multi-member, whatever. So depending upon what you do, there's going to be pros and cons. We all need to pay our fair share of taxes, but if there's things that I can do and organize my systems properly, if I can save taxes and still be in compliance with everything and have liability protection, that's the best of all the worlds for me. So if you guys ever look anything up on the county website, if you ever had to look stuff up and you're running around, you'll see that a lot of real estate is owned in LLCs.
Right, and trusts, LLCs and trusts.
LLCs are very easy to move assets around in from a tax standpoint. I mean, Paul can get it done, you can do whatever you want because legally he can get it done, but then depending upon how it's structured, there could be tax consequences when you come at the end of the year and you go, oh, I wish we could have done something a little differently. But if you look up on the website, you'll see a lot of LLCs own property. And the good thing with that is it's nice to own real estate in an LLC. But I don't necessarily want to operate my business out of an LLC because I might have a different opinion than I take on. You two have a business and let's say one of you has a building. Okay, I'm going to put the building and I'll have my business rent from my LLC. Totally fine. We just need to make sure we document everything. And what happens is slip, trip, and fall accidents where somebody falls and now they're going to sue my LLC, and that's where our office comes in, where I try to tell you and show you the financial obligations that you have as an LLC or an S-Corp, such that if something unfortunate happens and now you have to go see the likes of Paul, all of the work that Paul did for you to try to protect your assets, if financially you do not follow protocols for how those assets should be managed, like the checkbook. Unfortunately, the opposing attorneys then will try to say, I know you have an LLC, I know that you had it, but you haven't behaved in an LLC manner, in a financial manner, therefore, all Paul's work could be thrown out because we don't follow record-keeping rules.
Pat, what are those generally? We're talking about ways to get through the corporate shell of the LLC limited protection, and there are exceptions to the general rule that you can get through them. There are 3, 4, 5 of them. Pat, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, what we try to do is we try to tell the clients the way to get money out of the business. And has anybody ever worked for a company before? I mean, okay. So when you own your own company, it's easy for people to say, well, it's my company, I can do whatever I want. Totally agree. But financially, if we have taken the steps and gone through the time and effort and cost to set up a different entity, we need to kind of put our hat on. We kind of get to wear more than a couple hats. But if you've worked for some company, you wouldn't think that you would just write the check out for your home utility bill or your child's lunch program or stuff like that. But when we own our own business, we kind of sit in our own world and we kind of think that we can do whatever we want. You can. You absolutely can, but there's consequences. So what we work with is to try to show here's how you can take money out. It's following the rules, and can we keep our tax burden as low as we can at the same time. So I didn't bring that when I was thinking of it. Was I have a handout like this that shows how to, the big rule is intermingling money. So if it's my business, everything that goes through that checkbook needs to be for my business. If I need money, even if I'm a single member LLC, I still tell people, number one, have a separate checkbook. And if you need money for the house or for your kids, do not just pay that bill out of that business checkbook. It's not a business expense. So if you use your personal vehicle because everybody says, well, I'm going to buy a company car because now I have a company. Okay. Do you use the car for business? I mean, how much do you drive? I don't. I drive down the Ignite building. I don't go see people. Well, yes, your business can buy a car, but the IRS says you need to document how much did you drive it for work. So if you were working for Paul, and Paul said, hey, I need you to run up to the cities and deliver some papers to the courthouse, you would keep track of your mileage, and you would say, Paul, hey, I took my car to the cities, so could you pay me back for my mileage? And Paul would say, oh, sure. Give me your slip of paper, or your expense report, or your receipt. Oh, and I had to pay for parking when I was in downtown Minneapolis. So you would take the time and effort to say, here, this is exactly what I want from you, Paul. So, piece of cake, right? So when you're your own boss and you get to do whatever you want because I got my own business, you need to keep that same hat on and say, okay, I'm going to turn this document in. I'm going to put my boss hat on now, and I'm going to pay myself as an employee and say, I'll reimburse you for driving your car to make sales calls or to run to InstaPrints. And if we do that, that makes things really, really helpful when we have to get Paul involved.
Because the first way is what you call piercing the veil, correct?
It's piercing the corporate veil, exactly
Okay.
right. Yep. And here's a great example, and Pat and I talk about this all the time because our kids are the same age. Junior needs new tires on his car, winter's coming. The home checking account seems to be a little bit depleted, but there might be a little bit of money left in the business account. I can still, in my business, I'm a single member LLC. I can still pay for the tires of the car, but I make a loan from Paul LLC to Paul individually. So let's say it's $1,000. $1,000 comes over here. Now I have $1,000 and I pay for the tires and off we go. But I've got a record showing that that was a loan to Paul individually, or if the IRS disregards the loan, that it's additional income to me that I have to claim on $1,000 because I've taken a distribution. If I don't have that record, and I don't think anybody's going to pierce the corporate veil on a $1,000 one-time transaction, but when you, well, you don't know, but I don't think so. It's the problem is you get into a habit. I'm short for the electric bill, I'm short for the car payment, I'm short for the mortgage payment, I'm short for this. All of a sudden I'm standing over here with $20,000 in additional income and no record at all of how it got from that checkbook over here, or it came directly out of this checkbook to the mortgage, to the car, to whatever. Then we have a problem.
Isn't that how most businesses go broke or bankrupt though? Because they don't pay, if they're small businesses and they don't pay attention and do that kind of stuff, they end up running themselves in the hole? Because I just remember a story my mom told me. Her dad ran, back in the day, ran a Universal store, right?
Mm-hmm.
An everything store under one umbrella. And they sold the store, and this other family took it over, and within 5 years they were bankrupt because they did exactly what you talked about. They were using the store as their banking system for their personal stuff, and they went bankrupt.
They take things off the shelf because,
Right.
like an old-fashioned Ben Franklin store.
Right.
You had everything. You had knick-knack snacks. You had stuff for the
We had
house.
sixlets. Remember sixlets? Those little
Yeah.
chocolate things? Those are awesome. Sorry, off topic. Sorry about that.
Well, as long as we're on that, the Ben Franklin oven in Grand Marais is phenomenal. You are, seriously, it's like, holy
It
smokes,
is.
this is back to the 70s. I mean, they have like Pendleton shirts, they have little knick-knack things, you're like, wow. But, so what they probably did is well, I need this, so I'm gonna take it off the shelf.
And they don't ever pay the store back, so they lose
Correct.
money.
That's the ticket, there's a healthy push and pull between lawyers and liability protection and accountants and record keeping, and it's exactly that. Whatever it is that you're doing, at least keep a record of the doggone thing, so at the end of the year, you can go to Pat and you can say, great, you got $20,000 in loans, or you're going to jail because it all went to you personally and you paid for it out of the corporate book or whatever it is.
Or at the end of the year, you sit there and you go, we don't have any money in the business. Why? I mean, we're busy. And you go, well, how much stuff did you take off the shelves? Oh, let me see. I got my Ben Franklin store, so I got frames and I got clothes and I got this and that. And you go, well, that's $15,000. Just because you have access to it doesn't mean that you wouldn't go into Menards and shoplift it, so you shouldn't treat your own business any differently. So that's what happens, is people kind of get in the habit, and habits we all have them. So if we can get in good financial habits, that really, it makes life so much easier if we get off to a good start, as opposed to coming in and saying, oh, I formed an LLC on this, and you look at the stuff and you just go, okay, you gotta go see Paul and let's just maybe undo this thing. We never really funded it, and we've had that where people walk in, they go, yeah, I'm a multi-member LLC. Okay, let me see your documents. They never set up a separate checkbook. They never put their own money in. Well, they set up a separate checkbook once they had money coming in from customers, but they
From the
never
business.
put their own money in. So it's all those little details that are,
But 10 times, give or take, on average a year will undo something that will start up a business, whether it's a sole proprietorship, a corporation, or an LLC, just because it's just too messed up. And the tax consequences of trying to save it in its present format may be worse than just taking a recognition of a gain or a loss on that, and we just start all over. Now, to that, and I wanted to say this earlier, you can certainly go on the Minnesota Secretary of State site. That's the entity or the agency in Minnesota where you register businesses, LLCs, corporations, S corporations, C corporations, all of that. Everybody in this room can understand the forms and can fill it out, and you will be a registered, organized LLC or a corporation. But most people don't know that you have to file the IRS Form 2553, because when you register as a corporation, you're automatically a C corporation, which means any income that you make gets taxed rather at the corporate level, and then there's extra money sitting there. The corporation pays tax at the corporate level. Then you take a distribution out, so you have money, you get taxed again on a personal level. So you have that double taxation, which is the reason S corps were started in the first place. Well, if you don't file the 2553 form with the IRS within 3 months, 4 months, 3 months of filing,
65 days.
neither one, 65 days, then you have to wait until the next year before you can file it, and you have to live another year as a C corp. So you can do the basics, you can go online and do all of that, but what Pat is saying, and I think is exactly right, is if you don't set up your systems, and you don't have to come to a lawyer necessarily to set it up initially, but you should go to a lawyer to say, here's what I want to be, here's what I've done, does it work for what I want to do? They say yes, no, do this, do whatever. But then you go to the accountant who sets up the processes and says, you have to record keep this, you have to do this for your bookkeeping, you have to file this quarterly return, monthly returns, you have to pay your estimates, you have to do all the rest of it. Because if you don't set it up right from the beginning, it's going to cost you a lot of money to fix it at the end. If it can be salvaged, and sometimes it can.
And the Secretary of State, that's a pretty user-friendly site, but let's say back in the day, I started being an accountant and I called myself Patrick Fitschen. Okay, so that's my legal given name. That's my legal name. So you could do Patrick Fitschen on the Secretary of State website, or let's say now I want to say Fitschen Tax and Accounting. That's not my legal given name. So now you need to reserve that name with the Secretary of State so they can find you. But what's the other thing we have to do if we're doing an assumed name? We have to publish it in a local publication, newspaper, and say, hey, do you guys ever read the paper? My wife just said, hey, such and such's got a new business going on. I said, really? What is it? And she said, because this is what accounting nerds do. You read the paper and they go,
You read the legal notices in the paper?
Yeah, exactly. Well, right.
Fascinating.
Huh?
I said that's fascinating.
It is fascinating.
Well, it does let you know though, but what that does though is it says you've fulfilled that legal requirement to say, is it perfected? Oh, I have documents. I get that. But is it a perfected document? My registration isn't perfected if I don't have proof that I have published that now me as Patrick is doing business as something other than my legal name on my driver's license. So you can say, yeah, I did it. Did you do it all? And the devil's in the details. It really is, unfortunately. So, and nowadays the banks literally, I haven't had it this year, but 2 years ago the banks started checking. Some of us and our clients have to borrow money to run our business. So the banks have learned now that it's difficult for them to make you pay your loan back when things go really bad, or if you don't have your documents perfected, and they say, I can't borrow you money if you are not legally registered to do business. And the Secretary of State says that you're inactive. What? Oh, you mean I need to renew my Secretary of State registration every year? Yup. Guess what? After X number of years, the Secretary of State will do what's the term? Technical termination.
Administrative dissolution.
Administrative dissolution. So the Secretary of State says, well, you haven't renewed your stuff, so technically you're not registered to do business under that name anymore because you haven't renewed it. How much does it cost to renew it on time? Nothing. Nothing. Doesn't cost you a dime. How much does it cost you if you're late? Well, it costs you money then. You know, and they'll renew you, but you have to pay them a fee. So it's those devil in the details that there's a lot of stuff to do when we're in business first.
Is the renewal time different depending on the structure of the business?
No, it's every calendar year.
Always.
Every year,
I
okay.
don't know about fiscal. What do you do with fiscal year filers?
They go calendar.
Okay.
I think I have maybe a handful of fiscal filers anymore too. But, so every year they're gonna want you to do that, and the Secretary of State will do it. I mean, it's free, you can go online. But it's all those things that we all have to think about when we have.
Patrick, I've bogarted almost all of 45 minutes here. Anything you want to hit on before we see if there's any specific areas or questions anybody has that we haven't gotten to?
No, I'm okay. Maybe just,
Pat, as I said, and I'm dead serious about this, Pat's handouts are a whole heck of a lot more helpful than mine are, simply because it gives you a comparison between the various entities and what they can do for you. So that's a starting point for you to start to think about, do I want to go in business with somebody else? If so, do I want to be a partnership? Probably not. Do I want to be an LLC? Do I want to be an S Corp? And those are the kinds of conversations you have with yourself, your business partners, as you're thinking about your plan. But then, again, do your research, go online. Nothing that we're saying is secret. It's all out there, but nobody can give you advice online in a general sense because they don't know the specific idea you have and the specific avenue that you want to take with your business. And that's why it's really worth it to spend a little bit of money up front and get some advice, even if they don't draft any documents for you, from a lawyer and from an accountant to get you set up the right way.
You know, one of the things that we run across is a lot of people are leasing spaces.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they end up maybe not understanding those lease documents, and ending up kind of moving around a lot, and that's not good for business either. But is there anything you can kind of give these people, like some kind of information on leases and what you should be kind of looking at when you're entering into some kind of space like downtown or anywhere in the community?
Sure. From a taxation perspective, or a revenues and expenses perspective, obviously there's, the landlord wants to get as much money as they can for the property, you want to pay as little as you can for the property. The same is true for the term of lease. Landlord wants to keep you there for 5 or 10 years because that's guaranteed income to that person or that entity for 10 years. You want maybe a year because it's a startup, I'm not sure if it's gonna go, I'm not sure if I like this location, whatever the case may be. So you have the negotiation with the landlord about things that you can live with, both in terms of the amount of rent, are you paying electricity, or is the landlord doing it, who's paying the real estate taxes, who's paying snow and lawn maintenance, all of that kind of stuff that you deal with. Those are negotiations. But all the rest of the terms are really important too, in terms of what constitutes a default. When can they throw you out? Is it just for not paying rent, or is it because you put up signs that say, business is flourishing, I'm paying my rent on time, I'm paying my taxes on time, but you put up signs that say landlord's a dirty, rotten scumbag, and you have flashing lights and you're advertising what a rotten person that is. Is that enough for the landlord to kick you out of your space? What's in those leases is your contract with them, so you have to understand everything that's in there. Most folks don't, especially a commercial lease, and you need to get a little help with that as well.
Well, we could just walk through a little case study. So here's the story. So I have a building. You're a sole proprietor and you want to rent my space. You know, I have space, so you're going to rent it from me. As a sole proprietor, you're going to sign it as your name. And as a landlord, I'm going to say, okay, I probably have an attorney that drew up a good lease for me because now I have a personal guarantee in this lease. And someone says, well, I don't know, my business is fine, I'll just sign whatever I need to sign. What do you need? I'll sign it. So now you come in and let's say the two of you are in business. I get to pick on these guys because they're close, that's all. They're close over here. So let's say you've formed an S corp and you've gone through your pros and cons and you look at it and you say, oh, I have some creditor protection because now I'm your creditor because you owe me money and I'm going to come because rent might not be paid on time all the time, okay? So you say, we're in business together, we have an S corp and we're going to go lease property. If you sign a standard lease, most good leases would have a personal guarantee in there that says, I don't care if your business goes to pot, I don't care if you stop, because I don't really care. I know that you and you are going to pay me my rent. And that's a separate signature within the lease, and that's why you want to have someone review that, because now what you've done is you haven't pierced the corporate veil from an operation standpoint by commingling funds. You have said, my business isn't really, I haven't really been in business long, I don't really have much credit history, and the landlord says, well, I don't know if your business is gonna make it, but I know you've been in town for 20, 30 years, and I'll trust you, but not your corporation. You shut your business down, that landlord is gonna come. I'm gonna call Paul and say, they shut their business down in the middle of the night, I don't even know where they are. But I have this personal guarantee on my lease, Paul.
I got that, this week I got that exact phone call from a client, it wasn't from Patrick, but the tenant closed up shop, took all the equipment out in the middle of the night, and now the landlord's trying to collect the rent. And to Pat's point, he's exactly right. We do all the work, you do all your homework, you establish an LLC, and you have liability protection because your corporation or your LLC is a separate thing. It's a separate entity, right? You can't get through it unless we screw up with the checkbook. But then when we sign the lease, we sign John Jones, president of ABC Corporation, and then John Jones signs personally to guarantee, or John Jones signs individually. Landlord can't get anything out of the corporation that's not there. If there's no money in it, it's empty. He's holding an empty bag. But there's John Jones, who owns 14 farms, all sorts of fancy cars and boats and toys and equipment, and has a checking account worth $800,000. Well, landlord's gonna go after John Jones individually, and all the work you did to create this liability protected entity is wasted because you've allowed him to go around that to get at you personally.
And you don't have to be rich to have that happen, because I'm telling you, he was a very young entrepreneur. He was going, and he had ideas, and he had a franchise, and he was in the Skyway system in Minneapolis. 5-year lease, and you're talking $8,000 a month for rent. I mean, oh yeah, this was, I mean, we're big time, right? Because, hey, go big or go home. He went big. After about 32 months, sitting there looking at his financials and his tax return, he goes, I'm done. So what does he do? Sells all his equipment, and he's gonna try and figure out something. He goes and regroups. Oh, within about 60 days, a certified letter came from the landlord. They literally pursued him, and they said, we will have a lien on you forever. Here's your personal guarantee, because of course he went off and did this before he was my client. I picked him up after, whatever. He had to pay $8,000 a month for 34 months that he wasn't even in the space. Because he couldn't move, he couldn't do anything, so he borrowed money. He borrowed money to pay for that. I mean, it was so painful. I mean, when I did his tax return, losing money is helpful when it comes to paying taxes, because I don't really have to pay taxes if I lose money. But I don't know about you, but I'd rather make money and pay taxes than lose money.
So how do you keep that from happening then? If you were to sign a lease, what keeps that from being
That's
the case?
that's the push-pull of negotiating, and sometimes depends on who the landlord is, because when you're in downtown Minneapolis, that's corporate stuff, and man, they do not bend. I mean,
Those leases are brutal in the Skyway. It's a great question, and really, it might be a great dovetail into kind of a wrap-up, at least of the presentation part. Lost my train of thought. It was brilliant, too. Doggone it.
watch what you sign.
Son of a gun. Yeah. Oh, it's risk tolerance. You're going to go in business, right? You got an idea, you've got a product that you're going to sell. People, and you're going to ask people to do things for you, whether it's lease space, whether it's write your corporation, do your books, set up your payroll, do any of that stuff. What's your risk tolerance? This young fellow Pat's describing had a high risk tolerance. Sometimes that pays off and you really hit it big time. Sometimes it doesn't. You end up paying $100,000 a year for space you're not in. So the answer to your question is, you understand everything that you're signing and the obligations that you're getting into, whether it's written or whether it's oral, because a conversation we have is still a contract. It's harder to prove because there's nothing in writing, but if you agree to pay me $1,000 a month if I come over and mow your lawn once, that's still a contract and you have to pay me. So understand the obligations you're getting yourself into, both written and oral, and then in these negotiations, what's your risk tolerance? Am I willing to take that chance that, hey, I'm going to be the place, I don't know what the business was, food service bars and restaurants, everybody always wants to do those things. And they're great. And if you hit it, they're hot. If you're the place, usually it's 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 years, you're the place, and you're raking in money like there's no tomorrow. You're working like a dog, but you're making money. But then the new kid in town comes around. And if you've got a 10-year lease and all the money dries up because everybody's over at Sherry's place instead of at my place, you still have to make those payments. And so it's the push-pull, as Patrick said. It's a risk tolerance thing. How much risk are you willing to take on to make this succeed? And on that front, to Sherry's question with leases, many times the contracts that we sign dovetail or are tied to lending agreements. Pat's got a line of credit, I'm sure I've got a line of credit for my business, which is nothing more than a loan document. But that loan document obligates me to report to the bank every year to say, hey, I've got this much in collectibles, or my revenue is this much, I have to provide my personal financial statements. They're long, they're 4, 5, 6 pages long. If you violate one of those terms of your loan document with your bank by going out of business, and I'll tell you unequivocally, every time you go out of business and just close up in the middle of the night, you're violating a lease, you're violating any equipment leases that you have, and all the way over here back to the bank, you're in violation of that too. So now, not only do you get to pay Skyway guy $100,000 a year for the rent of a space that you're not in, you probably own the ice cream dispenser equipment that you gave back and didn't end up paying on that lease thing, and the $40,000 you borrowed from the bank over here to start up, you're surely in violation of that lease as well. So your $100,000 now turns into $170,000, $180,000, $200,000, $300,000. Yep, to me, and correct me if you have a different opinion, you have to understand what you're doing. Once you understand what the implications are, then you do your risk analysis.
You're just well informed. You just need to, you're just well informed, and it comes with, I mean, if unfortunately, as we get older, we kind of learn from the school of hard knocks. Oh, I'm not doing that again. That hurt. Where somebody does it, and they go, "Are you kidding me?" Yep, that's how it goes. And so, unfortunately, we've all learned that over time. So, the big one that I'd like to bring up though is a lot of times what we see is me and my friends share common interest, and I like what they like, and we're gonna start this business. We've been friends forever. We've been friends since high school, hang out, all that stuff. I'm gonna get into business because they have the building, I have the expertise, and maybe a little cash. So we're gonna form, I don't care what it is, partnership, LLC, S Corp, I don't care what kind of thing you're going to get into. The chances of you still being friends and being together in 10 years is so remote. When you get into business, you can do all that Secretary of State website, you can do all that stuff online, you can, because you can find stuff online all the time. But what 99% of the clients that I ever have walk through the door, if I haven't gotten in front of them, they will never, ever have a buy-sell agreement. So when you're tired of her because she always spends money on advertising, and I don't think we need advertising, and then she does this, and now we start really now we're butting heads, and we're 50-50 because we're buddies. If I don't have a way to know how I get to buy you out or you buy me out, it is a miserable thing. So every client I have, if there's more than one person involved, you have to have a buy-sell agreement with your attorney. They are not cheap, because what does it cost to get married? Not much. Last time I checked, it gets kind of mean, nasty, and expensive to get divorced. I'm telling you, in business, it's just as bad. It's just as bad. So it takes more time and effort and cost. But if you get into business with somebody, just please get a buy-sell agreement. You will be really glad you did.
And I was going to butt in and say, I agree with you entirely. There's the old saying, never do business with family and friends. That's true for the most part. But if you think that you can still do it after you think it through and talk with everybody else, you have to get in and plan all this stuff ahead of time. It can't be 50-50 vote. It never works to have a 50-50 vote. So who's going to be 51? Who's going to be 49? Who's going to get 60% of the distributions? Who's going to get 40% of the distributions? Who's going to make all the decisions? What if I don't show up for work? You have to talk all that stuff through and get it done. But I joke, it's not very funny, but I joke with my clients, when you come to me for a business setup, my job is to plan for the divorce before you get married. You have to know how we're going to get out before we get in. Otherwise, I agree with Patrick. Business breakups, I don't do family law, so I'm speaking out of school, but business breakups are just as nasty or more so than divorces.
It's because now it's about, why did you come together? Money. It's all about money, and unfortunately I'm in business with my wife. There are certain things in that building that it is just understood. I don't touch it. I don't no. People call and say, hey, what about this? That is Lee's responsibility, that is her area, and she works that, and we're married.
And
We've been married for 30 years, so it works, but, you know, if husband and wife tends to be a little different, because you have an emotional attachment as well, but most of the time when I see people that are in business together, it's not quite the same. So, so there's not as much reason to tolerate things that you don't like, you know, so.
Good point. And I'm not in business with my wife, and she's allowed to come to the office, but she can't talk anything about business or ask any questions and all of that. And she's very happy with that. That works very well for us. Any other areas? You know, we've gone an hour and kind of really skimmed over a lot of stuff. I don't know if it's helpful for where you folks are at and what you're thinking about doing or not, but I'm sure Pat's willing to jump into some other areas if you have other thoughts or other questions.
Any questions, you know, I mean, what our goal tonight was is just to kind of bring some high level stuff where it's stuff to think about, and then if you're thinking about getting into business or you're doing this or that, it's like, oh, it's just a resource, you know, and do your own research as well, you know, but we'll certainly dive into any questions that you have.
On a not-for-profit LLC, how is that different than a 501c3?
A 501c3 is actually a corporation.
Okay?
Organized under the Internal Revenue Code. You organize a corporation in
All
the
right,
state of
that's, the
Minnesota.
501c3 is a corporation.
Yep.
And this would be a limited liability corporation.
Correct. A not-for-profit limited liability corporation. Most of the time, because I don't even know, well, there has to be. When you form your corporation in Minnesota, not-for-profit corporation, then you make the filing, what's the form, do you remember? The 501c3 recognition form at the IRS. They send you the letter saying, great, you're
Right.
tax exempt. That's fine. With a not-for-profit LLC, you'd have to get that same recognition. I don't know, but I suspect you file the exact same form. You just indicate I'm an LLC, not a corporation. But you still have to provide your mission statement, where you get your funds from, all of the rest of that stuff to get that recognition to be tax exempt.
And I'll tell you, like many things nowadays, I mean, you need to live and breathe nonprofits to be in it, because I help a couple nonprofits that I know, and other than that, I don't delve into it much, and the only reason I do them is because I know the people and I'm trying to help them, and I, quite frankly, probably, if I didn't know them and, you know, wasn't connected to them, there's no way I would do it, because it's a totally different world. I mean, you know, Paul does a lot of real estate and estate planning, but you say he doesn't do any family law. Well, he doesn't do any litigation. I mean, there's so much stuff that, you know, like you say, nonprofit.
Completely different animal.
Oh, you bet.
Just today, just literally 3 hours ago, I was on the phone with a nonprofit specialist in St. Paul saying, I have this issue, I think I need to do this, do I? She said, no, that's completely wrong, you do it this, and here's why. Because it's truly a specialized animal all to itself. So if you're looking at going to the nonprofit arena, the organization part, which everybody has to do, you file with the Secretary of State and do that stuff. After that, I turn all my folks over to specialists that live in that area, because there's so much compliance. Now, compliance is a big thing.
Yeah,
Holy cow.
yeah, I literally just referred one, because I don't know anybody in town that works exclusively with nonprofits, and I just referred a client because I had a friend of mine that their friend is starting up a nonprofit, very good cause, all that stuff, and they came to me after all this stuff is done. I'm like, listen, you need to seriously, and so I found a referral for like an advocate attorney that is partially maybe nonprofit, so they don't charge an arm and a leg, but it's its own world there.
And in that arena, the one thing nobody ever thinks about is liability. You sit on the board of a nonprofit. Nonprofits typically don't have a lot of money, at least when they start, and nobody wants to buy officers and directors insurance to protect the board members from any claims if they make a bad decision. Nonprofits, in my view, are much riskier to sit on a board on than a for-profit entity.
It's an awesome point, because my wife and I have both been on nonprofit boards in the past, and the number one rule right up front, I want to see a copy of that policy, otherwise I won't be on it, because everyone's so well-intentioned, but if something happens, I don't care what it is, and someone gets hurt, he doesn't do litigation, but we'll say he does, who's he gonna sue? Well, the nonprofit doesn't have any money. Oh, but there's some pretty okay funded people that are on the board. I bet
Right.
they have some money and they failed their responsibility they failed their fiduciary responsibility. Everybody thinks that, oh, I'm gonna be on this board and it looks nice and I get to help out. I get that, but unfortunately, I kind of look at it like when Paul was talking about new clients, when you're getting into business, I'm ready for the divorce up front. How's this work if this doesn't go well? Do we have an insurance policy? So, not that it's not a good thing to donate your time, but just be aware what your risk
What
tolerance
the risks
is.
are.
My risk tolerance is absolutely no way. I'm not doing it. If they didn't have a policy, I'd say no, I'm done. And
So it's a risk policy?
it's a directors and officers insurance. It's a liability policy.
Kind of an errors and omissions policy, where they're saying that because the directors are they're the board of directors of the company, you're making the decisions for the company.
Right.
Yeah. You set the policy, and
Yeah.
my kid got hurt, or
Because you didn't think of this, or you were negligent, or
Yeah.
whatever the case may be. And Pat will agree with me on this, there's a lot of doom and gloom, be careful about sitting on boards and all that. We should all do that, because it's very rewarding to you, and there's a lot of good entities, but
just be aware.
be
That's
aware
all.
of what the risks are, right?
Yep.
And most of the time, if they have D&O policy, great, you're covered.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a good thing for all of them.
It is.
Obviously, not that I'm an insurance salesman, but it's just a good thing.
Which, back to talking about for-profit entities and the things we have to do when we start up, we didn't talk about insurance. Your insurance agent's your best friend for the first 4 or 5 years of your business. It's the worst money you ever spend until you need it, but it's the best money you ever spent, that insurance premium.
Yes.
I wish Kubish was here, I say that to him all the time, and he just rolls his eyes at me.
And it's important to have an agent that knows the type of business you're in, because I'm sure we've all heard, somebody has homeowners insurance and, oh, that wasn't covered. How can that not be covered? They'll say, well, when you're in business and you go, oh, that wasn't covered?
Or, well, it's too expensive for that additional policy, if it's a water intrusion policy, if it's an employee theft policy, if it's a computer security policy, I don't want to pay that. Again, it's your risk assessment. When I'm at your front desk and I'm stealing out of your checkbook every day and there's $80,000, $100,000 gone, I still go to jail, don't get me wrong, but you don't get the money back because you don't have any insurance on it.
Good idea.
That's probably not a good example. I wouldn't steal, of course.
No.
If Sherry was stealing from your checkbook, that's a much better example.
But your point about serving on nonprofit boards is good. I mean, it is very rewarding. It's a lot of work, but just know that if you do it, you might want to ask some of that, if you care. And when was the last time you ever heard about something bad happening? I don't know, but, some of us, I don't know, your risk tolerance, how fast you go when you're driving down the highway. 55? I mean, I have a brother, he drives 71 miles an hour at 55. I'm like, are you out of here? I don't do that, but that's his risk tolerance, so he's fine with that, and I'm like, 3 or 4, maybe 5. So we all have our own risk tolerance on every little thing, so.
I think this has been great, and it's kind of what Mark Thine and I from the SBDC really wanted to deliver to people that were interested, is kind of making them aware of different things as far as legal structure and your tax liabilities and things like that. So I think both Pat and Paul did a great job. I hope you guys got something out of it, because, and I'm glad that the city's here to record this so that we can share this out on Facebook and YouTube and things like that, so.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having us. One thing I want to say, and Pat would agree with this, Pat and I are friends, we've been friends for a long time, but there isn't a week that goes by I don't call him up and say, Pat, this is what I'm going to do. Tell me why I can't do this. Most of the time, he says, no, that works and makes sense. Sometimes he saves my rear end, and less so. I get calls from Pat saying, here's what I want to do. Can I do this? No, you can't. Yes, you can. So the interplay in information is awesome. But the point I bring that up is I've owned my business now for, geez, coming up on 20 years, I suppose. And I love it. I love the freedom. I don't like, money goes up and down, and there's stressors and everything in every business. But starting a business is an awesome thing, and running a business is an awesome thing. So good luck to you as you go forward in it. I encourage it for everybody if your risk tolerance is in that place, because it's a great way to go through life, and especially because Michelle, who won't see this, we live out of town, but my wife has no part in my business. It's the only place where I win. I've never won an argument at home, ever, in my entire life, but I win every argument in the
Yeah, but
office.
that's just because it's a legal responsibility.
So next month,
Business
November
plan?
14th is business plan, yes.
There you go.
It's